Imagine this. You're a runner who has just qualified for the Boston Marathon, and 2 months later, you shatter your ankle. That's what happened to Gabe Cox, my guest today on Bible Talk and the author of Victory Run, Turning Trials into Triumphs. She couldn't run for 3 months, rehab for another 3 months, had to relearn how to run for a full year. And this conversation, we look at trials, we look at goal setting, we look at being a mom to three active boys like she is, and a coach, as well as a podcaster. This lady does everything. And not only that, but toward the end of the interview, you're going to hear her talk about the surprise opportunity to be on a game show I guarantee you've seen. All right, let's dive into my conversation with Gabe Cox. Well, Gabe Cox, thank you so much for joining me today on Bible Talk.
Oh, thanks for having me, Keith. I'm excited to be here and chat.
Yeah, we met when you were working on this second book and walked through that coaching process. We'll get to that, I don't know, 10 minutes from now or something like that. But first, tell everybody about yourself, where you're from, your family.
Sure. So I'm been married for 16 and a half years. That sounds crazy to my best friend, Josh. We live in Colorado, beautiful mountains. We came from Minnesota, so I like the temperate weather now. And I have three boys, 14, 12, and 8. So all different levels, loud and crazy in our house. And we just added a puppy. So I think I'm going nuts. And
Right,
everyone's like, is it a girl puppy? I'm like, no, I'm still outnumbered.
right.
But I am an avid runner. My kids are all very athletic. We're on the go all the time, but we love to play board games, hike. I love being in nature, and writing and coaching are two of my passions.
That's great. That's great. So yeah, we're gonna get into several different things because you've got a few books and coaching and a podcast and on social and all that. So we're gonna look at that. But tell us about, because what do you feel like you've done first? Kind of what's been your order as far as what did you do out of college, and then did you start writing before you started coaching, and the coaching came out of that, or did you start coaching first and the podcast? Kind of what was the order, the journey a little bit for you?
Sure. It's been a journey, we'll tell you that.
Yeah,
But coming out of college, I actually was a broadcast journalism major. I wanted to do sports broadcast, be on ESPN, Sports Center, my favorite things to talk about.
yeah.
But my journey was I got married, and a year later found out we were having our first child. Moved back to Minnesota, which is not where you do broadcast journalism. And so I kind of like put my dreams, quote unquote, on the shelf for a little bit and just explored a ton of other things as I was navigating motherhood. But I always, since I was really little, I would say since kindergarten, I've had a dream of writing, and I knew I was going to be an author. But I always thought I'd be an author come out of high school, not wait until I'm 37. I don't know how old I was when I released my first book. It was probably 36 or 37. And that journey was so interesting. But my entrepreneurial journey started with the writing, the love of writing. But I began running first. Running was just a pastime of mine, something I loved, but I learned how to set goals through it, and that's kind of where some of my ideas for writing came. So writing came first, and then realizing, wow, through this writing I'm making an impact, and I could maybe help coach others to do the same things, like find a goal and really actually finish it and do it God's way, like actually do it for his kingdom and for his glory. And so that's kind of how it progressed.
So what was your sport in high school and college?
Well, in high school it was basketball. And because I hated running at that time, like I always looked at the people who were cross country runners, and I'm going, you're so crazy. Why do you run? Like you have no destination. There's nothing, no purpose behind it.
Right.
And so basketball, I was fast. I loved that kind of running. But in college, I went to a D1 school. I wasn't good enough for D1. So I went into I did every intramural you could think of, like including water polo. And
Nice.
that's when I took up running. And so, but that was mainly because I needed something to keep myself active, and I didn't know what else to do. So, but basketball is my sport.
Yeah, great. And and I kind of like you, I did every intramural that you could possibly do. Unfortunately, basketball is the sport that I always wanted to be good at and just wasn't.
Aw.
I always loved basketball, but so they just had me guard somebody because I could play good defense even when I couldn't shoot well. So
Hey, defense matters.
definitely, definitely. All right. So your first book is called Mind Over Marathon: Overcoming Mental Barriers in the Race of Life. So tell us more about that and kind of who that's for and what that one's about.
Sure. Mind Over Marathon's kind of my baby. It's still my favorite book that I wrote, but it really started from when I worked to qualify for the Boston Marathon. It was a huge, huge goal that I had as I started racing and different things. And it was actually a huge goal because I would have had to cut about 45 to 50 minutes off my marathon time, which
Wow.
maybe doesn't sound like a lot to some people,
No.
but that's like a minute and a half plus per mile. So you're like, okay, now I have to actually sprint the marathon. How do you do
Right.
that? And so some people are like, well, that's not really like a godly goal, is it? But for me, God used running to teach me how to set goals and how to be
Hmm.
able to do hard things. And so that was why I set that goal, was because I wanted to learn how to do hard things. And I also wanted to be an example for my kids. I wanted them to see how you do that. How do you set a goal? How do you overcome all the obstacles and walls that come, face those giants and still push through? And how do you set a goal big enough that you can't really do it on your own? So it's not you getting the credit. And
Hmm.
so as I was training and applying some different mental training and success principles that I have learned along the way, I was realizing, wow, these principles and these things work in running. These work in racing. What else could they work in? And that's when I kind of had an idea of this book. And a lot of it was about training your mind. And honestly, one of my favorite verses, and this is my theme verse for what I do, is Romans 12:2. And it says,
Hmm.
do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Hmm.
And so different, contrary to the world and the mindset of the world. Renewing our mind is a daily process, but that's something that God trained me in and like taught me how to do that. And obviously, it's always a daily struggle. I think just renewing our mind is a daily struggle. But Mind Over Marathon is about that. It's about breaking some of those mental barriers, like really renewing that mind daily, bringing God into our goals and letting Him work through us, and not trying to do things on our own strength. Because I definitely did goal set the world's way. Like I tried to do it the way they say to do it and kind of left God out of it because I was like, well, what does he have to do with my goals? When
Right.
really, as a Christian, our purpose is to be kingdom builders. Our
Yeah.
purpose is to draw people to the Lord. And so I didn't realize that was a part of what goal setting is. And so Mind Over Marathon really is about taking your goal from start to finish, but doing it God's way and not the world's way. And how
Hmm.
do you overcome those mental barriers? That's why it's mental barriers in the race of life, because a lot of people go, Mind Over Marathon, I'm not a runner. This book isn't for me. And I didn't write it for runners. Like, obviously, runners will relate to it, but almost everyone can relate to a running analogy. Like, everyone
Right.
knows running. And so it's really meant for the person who deep inside knows they have some purpose. They know that they have something that they want to do and they feel that stirring. And I know that that stirring is God creating that passion in them. And so how do you discover that, and how do you bring it out and into fruition? So
Hmm. So I want to unpack the phrase that you've used several times of ha- doing goals God's way and versus the world's way. And you had done goals the world's way. Just, I mean, if somebody's watching this and just trying to grasp, okay, what are obviously you unpack the whole thing in the book. They can read the book, but for right now, what are kind of the bullet points of what are the big differences? Like this would be doing it the world's way. This would be doing it God's way. What unpack that a little bit for us.
yeah. So the biggest difference, I'll give you the biggest difference, is the world's way is putting self on the throne. It's all about self and self interest. my truth, my this, me, I need to do this, I'm sacrificing everything for me. God's way is putting God on the throne. I'm doing this for him. It's not all about me. It's about what can I do to impact somebody else. Though you are essentially, once you hit the goal, it is, I mean, it is an accomplishment. You feel good about it, but
Mhm.
it's about what can it do for others, or what can it do to fulfill your mission on earth, rather than what can it do. It's not self-seeking.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not prideful. And so you, uh, world's way is self on the throne. God's way is God leading. World's way is you take control. It Whatever you can think, whatever you want, you can have. That's God. That's the world's way. God's way says, whatever I desire for you, you can have. It doesn't mean that I can
Hmm.
just go out and manifest because I want a big burly house. I can't just go out and manifest that and have it because I want it, because God's way might not be that. And I have to be okay with that. Like, his way is us seeking him first so he can draw us. He'll bring those desires, the desires he has for me will become our desires.
Hmm.
And then we will have what we want because those are our desires, right?
Right.
And so I did a lot of like trying to manifest certain things and do it the more new agey worldly way. Granted, God's way is to renew your mind. It is to
Mhm.
think positive thoughts. It is to get out the junk, but it's to do it so that we can grow, so he can mold and shape us, so
Mhm.
that we can do hard things and have an impact and not have like that self-serving, self-seeking mindset. And so those are the biggest things I would say in
Mhm.
the world versus God.
Yeah, and I love this conversation because I mean we didn't think we were going to spend as when we were prepping for this, we didn't talk, think we are going to spend this much time here, but I think this idea, maybe it's because this is where my mind is right now, because as we're recording this in July of 22, in the Bible Life community, the online Bible study community, we are actually doing a series through these weeks in July on loving God with our mind,
Mm,
specifically about the mind, just because I think that is so often one that gets left out. And you kind of touched on the reason that I think Christians frequently leave it out is because anytime we start talking about the mind or thinking positive thoughts or renewing the mind or even meditating on something. Well, meditation, that's a very biblical concept, but it feels like we're dabbling in something worldly.
mhm,
And I think that the idea of just letting the world have something that is really God's, that's not something I'm willing to do. So I love it that you're bringing that glory to God and our submission of ourselves to God into these just common principles of when we think positive. You don't tell an 8-year-old kid you're trying to teach to hit a baseball to say don't strike out, don't strike out, don't strike out, don't you you know they're going to strike out, right? There are some things, and when we put that in there, so I love this. I think that you and I could end this interview at some point and still talk for 4 more hours about this, because I think the loving God with our mind and how that gets renewed. Now,
mhm.
as this is Bible talk, when you're setting goals, when you're coaching somebody through setting goals, when you're in the midst of that, how does we can talk about the big picture of wanting to submit to God and to give Him glory for it and having that Him on the throne and not us. From a kind of in the trenches, how does God's word, or what role does that play? How does that play out in your both your personal goal setting as well as your coaching?
That's a great question. So, I mean, the first thing that we do in my coaching is we really get to the root of the why. Like, we get to the root of what does this matter? Why is this goal so important to you? Because in order not to quit, you really have to have something that you're working toward that actually matters to
Mhm.
you, and really dig deep in that. And um, when it comes to actually going after the goal, like we just talked about, world's way versus God's way, there are those affirmations. So, like
Mhm.
that word, that's affirmations. Well, are you affirming who you are in yourself, or are you affirming who you are in Christ? And so I am not a lot of things. I am not strong. I am not worthy. I am not enough because biblically I'm not without Christ. But I am strong because Christ is strong. I am worthy because I'm a child of the King. I am. So I like to bring those things in. Let's look at the promises that he has for us. Who are we? Who does he say we are? And really understanding our identity first really matters when it comes to goal setting. And that's something that sounds really funny, but it's true because if we don't really know whose we are and who we are, it's going to be hard for us to go do something hard because we're going to want to quit at the first obstacle. But when we know whose strength we have and whose power and whose authority, then when that going gets tough, we can lean on that. And I
Mhm.
love the verse. I can't remember the reference, but it's this is the way, walk in it. Right. And
Mhm.
so when we are doing that, when we're setting those goals, um, it's important to have a plan. Like one of the things we do is we strategically plan things out. Now, we all know our plans don't work out the way we think. Like we have to be flexible in it. But if you don't have a plan, guess what you're not going to do? You're not going to take action.
Right.
And so the plan is important. But are we bringing the plan to God in our prayer time? Are we bringing the plan to our devotional? Are we willing to pivot if He says to pivot? Are we
Mhm.
willing to change it if we need to? Now that doesn't grant us authority to quit. Because
Right.
sometimes we'll be like, "Oh, well, God didn't want me to do that." Well, did God not want you to do it because it's too hard and you just don't wanna do it? Or
Right.
did He really tell you not to do it, right? And
Right.
so, that's one of the things I like to do. I bring that scripture in, bring our goals there daily. I love to post my goals. Like, that's something I tell people. I tell them to post them, not to manifest them, not to think and dwell on them all day, every day. Because if you're dwelling on your goal and not on God, that becomes an idol, right? Because anything that you think about that takes the place of God is an idol. But when you see it, you're more apt to remember it and you're more apt to take action on it. So it's important to put our goals in front of us. But then if we bring them into the quiet time, if we bring them into our devotions, if we bring them into prayer, then we're really bringing God into them. And then He is the one on the throne. He is the one driving. And when He's driving, it's great because we don't have to have the control. We don't have to know how it's going to come together. Yes,
Right.
we have to take the action, we have to walk in it, but then we let Him do the work. And it's great. It's awesome. It's the best way to set goals.
That's great. That's great. I love it. And that the the phrase that I heard many, many moons ago that I'm sure you've heard before as well that came to mind as you were talking about that is it's a lot easier for God to direct something that's moving or someone that's moving than someone who's still.
Mm.
And that whole idea of having a plan. I mean, I've probably in the book writing course that you took from me that I probably said at some point that every vision demands a plan. Without a plan, a vision is just a dream. And
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
so a lot of times we're like, "Oh, I'm just waiting on God." No, you're not. You're being lazy. Yeah.
Yep. You're being thoughtful. Exactly. It's an excuse.
Right. All right. So you recently released Victory Run, turning trials into triumphs. So tell us about that one. And as I read the story that prompted this book, I found myself quite honestly getting squeamish. So which is a sign of good writing. So there you go. But tell us about kind of what led to that and again kind of who this book's for and how it helps them.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, I didn't plan to write this book.
Right.
This was
I
definitely
hope not.
God saying, "I think you can write this book." And here's why, because the book, the analogy is another running analogy, but it's my experience 3 years ago or maybe 4 years ago now, 2018 in the fall. I qualified for Boston again, but I qualified with a bigger burly goal because I wanted to see if I could do harder things, and 2 months later, I broke my ankle, but I didn't just break my ankle, I, like, shattered my ankle.
Oh,
It was bad. I mean, I have screws and plates, and they had to like readjust my ankle back into place. And so I was out I couldn't walk for 3 months or drive. And I couldn't even start running until 6 months. And running meant learning to run again. It wasn't just, oh, I could just start running. It took me more than a year to even feel somewhat comfortable. And so
so
that was,
I want to pause you for a second.
yeah.
Now, how old were your kids at this point? You're a mom of three active boys. And in the fall of 2018, they're how old?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just trying to picture this as a dad of 3 kids. I'm
Yeah.
trying to.
10, 8, and 4, I would say. So, yeah, so busy because my older ones are competitive gymnasts, so I had to figure out how do I get them to the gym every day. And that was when God kind of when I broke my ankle, I feel like, I always said God doesn't give us trials, but I lie about that because he sometimes does. Like
Yeah.
sometimes trials come because he's telling us something. Um, and so I said it might not have been God given, but it definitely was God used because I think he actually was telling me stop because I wasn't listening. And when we're not listening, he's going to do something to get us to hear him. And
Mm,
that was my breaking point where he said, "You are doing way too much. You are not in your calling because you're trying to have your hand in everything and you're not present anywhere." And so
mm,
it was actually a huge learning curve for me. But it was also my livelihood because I was a fitness instructor, I was a run coach, I was driving my kids all over. I was the homeschool director for our community and for a bunch of other communities I helped out. So I was very active and I needed my legs. Like that's just the way it was. When I broke my ankle, my work stopped.
mm,
And so I had to learn to rely on rest. I needed to learn how to rest. I needed to learn how to simplify. I needed to learn how to delegate. I needed to learn how to ask for help. There were so many things in that season that I had to learn. And honestly, as soon as I broke my ankle, my first thought really wasn't, I have a book in me, but it was one of those thoughts early on. I was like, okay, maybe this can be a book. And so it's really about turning trials into triumphs. It's about what do you do when the going gets tough and when a trial comes in. And a broken ankle really doesn't seem like a surmountable issue. For me, it was life changing.
oh yeah.
And what I realized in the process is it was a form of loss. And so I still went through the grieving process like you would with any kind of loss or transition, whether it's a job loss or a loss of a loved one or different things. I still went through that same process.
Hmm.
And I had to work to not go back to the place I was in college and early adulthood because I did deal with a deep depression and an eating disorder. And one of my first thoughts, when it talks about mind, your thoughts are powerful. One of my
Hmm.
first thoughts was, maybe I can't eat anymore. Like that was one of my first thoughts. How am I going to stay thin? How am I going to stay active? Like if I'm not active, I can't eat. And granted, I had the tools in my belt from before that didn't affect me. But when that's your first thought, what do you do? How do you control that, right? And so all of these things are in the book, but really it's about um, this book is meant for those who are going through a trial, are going through a tough season, are in the waiting, and they don't know what to do.
Hmm.
They need practical tangible tips or promises or God's word to renew them and to really get through that grieving process. And then to understand how can you take that and how can you come out stronger and use your mess as your message.
Hmm. Use your mess as your message. Okay, I got to write that down. That's, I'm gonna steal that. I'm a public speaker, so I steal everything I ever
Right.
say. So that's why there's nothing new under the sun. But,
There is
just new ways to put it. So I love it. That the what you just said it's for somebody who's going through a trial, somebody who's kind of in that struggle, and I want to say yes, and I think it's for somebody who has come out of a struggle and wants to figure out some new ways to process it, or even somebody who is in a I want to say an easy season, but maybe a season of blessing or whatever. That you've heard it said before that you're either in a trial, you've just come out of a trial, or you're going to hit a trial this side of heaven. That's kind of the way that it goes. And I think sometimes reading a book like that talk about training your mind. It prepares our minds
Mhm.
to notice the opportunities to turn a trial into triumph earlier on in the trial, right? That sometimes it's kind of like if you read something or think through or to process with somebody about processing grief and processing even death, that it's something that sometimes those lessons on grief while you're grieving are less helpful, right? I mean, it's kind of, I have a friend of mine who wrote a book about that called Alongside, and she quotes me in the book of something I say all the time, which is just because it's true does not mean it's helpful.
So true.
There are times when you
Amen.
hear things that are true that are not helpful, but oh man, this is so good. So good. So you now we've already alluded to you've got so many other things as well. So you're on social media, Instagram. If you're on Instagram, Gabe Cox _ Red Hot Mindset. Your website is, I'm going to just show this here for a second. Where are we at? There we are. So Red Hot Mindset, where you can find out about coaching. You got a podcast going on, Goal Driven Moms. So probably not going to be a guest on that one.
You never know. I have got some on the podcast, so get ready.
I have spoken at some women's events. It's pretty fun, actually. But yeah, different resources there, and on pin. I'm going to come back to where we were. So so if you're searching for the podcast, Goal Driven Moms, Pinterest, just Red Hot Mindset. I love that name. That's such a great one. But great. I mean, even just, because this just came out. So my copy came while I was out of town. And so I've only been able to like scratch the surface and just read the brutally hard parts at the beginning. And so I'm looking forward to unpacking the rest of it. But I can't encourage people more strongly to grab a copy of that. And I get a copy of your first book too, because that's a topic that you and I share the same passion on for sure. So, I just put up some of those different, places people can connect with you. I love to end these Bible Talk conversations with some rapid fire questions. One of my rapid fire questions is typically, what's one of your favorite Bible passages? And you already like preempted that about 12 minutes ago by jumping into Romans. So I'll start the first one. Do you have a second or third or fourth favorite?
I have lots, but my actual very, very favorite is Proverbs 4, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your paths.
Good. All right. The rest are not Bible stuff.
All right, let's go.
Okay. So I'm gonna tee this one up because I already know the answer to it. Have you ever been on a game show, and what's the story behind it?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
really?
Yeah, I
can't believe it.
I was on Wheel of Fortune last November, and it was super fun. What an experience. Never thought in a million years I would. But the behind the scenes is my boys convinced me to try out, but I did it for my dad because my dad and I, it's a long time memory that we've watched since I was born. So and we play on the TV, and whoever wins that round gets all the money, and then you see who gets the most money at the end. So I did it for him, and it was a surprise and a really special time for him to see me on there. And what's funny is that it looked like I did really badly in the beginning, but it did turn out okay. So
Good. Yes. And so if you're watching this interview, you can actually go here on YouTube to and just search, Gabe Cox, Wheel of Fortune or something. I think people can find that. I got a chance to see that. And then now, because it's a recorded show that's then aired, you were back home and you were in the room with your dad when he saw it happen, right?
I was, yeah. I flew home to Minnesota to watch the show with him, and he had no idea. So it was a huge secret. And the unfortunate part is he really didn't have any idea until after the show was over. So he didn't realize it was me. So, but I thought he was just pulling my leg. I'm like, because he says, "Oh, Gabe," like, he's just, "Oh, he said Warren," because that's his name. And Pat's talking about, is he talking about me? And so I'm thinking he's pulling my leg the whole time, but he really had no idea.
Oh.
So I had to watch it immediately again. And I was wearing the same outfit I wore, had my hair the same way, everything. But yeah, so
That's funny.
it made it fun.
All right. Where has been your favorite place you've ever gotten to go for a run?
That's a hard one. There's so many. Well, I would say my favorite place was the St. George Marathon. and that's the one I qualified for Boston for the
In
second
southern Utah, down
in
there?
southern Utah. It's gorgeous, and it was just the most pretty run, and some downhill, which is great. I love downhill.
Now, if they threw in a bicycle, I'd be right there with you. Okay. All right. What is, because I know that you're a runner and you're but when you're watching a movie with your family at 9 o'clock at night, what are the snacks in your room? Because you've got 3 boys, you got a husband, you guys all like the same snacks. Everybody have something different. What do snacks at movie night look like?
It's my fault. It's ice cream. Anything ice cream. Yeah.
Now you're speaking my love language.
Yes.
So,
And chocolate, please. Yes.
yeah. Oh, that's so favorite flavor.
Favorite flavor is monkey. I think it's called monkey something ice cream, but it's fish food ice cream. That's what it's called.
Oh, the Ben and
Ben
Jerry's.
and Jerry's, but I don't get it very often. That's just an extra treat. But
Yeah.
chocolate, brownie, cookie dough.
You name it.
Chocolate, extra chocolate.
All right. So if you could, last one, if you could have dinner or spend the day, if you could spend the day with one athlete who is no longer living, who would you like to spend a day with?
Ooh, athlete who's no longer living. That's hard.
Or you could even say athlete who's no longer competing. If it's somebody who's like in their 60s or 70s or something like that.
Well, there's so many. I mean, there's so many athletes probably that are not living that I could say, but not, I would say Kevin Garnett, Timberwolves basketball player, one of my favorites, like twice as tall as I am. But growing up, he was my favorite athlete in the entire world, loved his basketball, rooted for him when he was on the Celtics, winning championships without me and all the things. But I would just love to pick his brain and see what NBA was like and the lessons he learned along the way.
Very cool. All right. Well, Gabe, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, check out Victory Run and Red Hot Mindset and the Goal Driven Moms podcast. Find Gabe all over the place. So, Gabe, thank you so much, and looking forward to talking again.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith.
All right, everybody. We will see you on the next episode of Bible Talk. Bye-bye.